kindness can be a survival strategy.
Yeah.
And that was one of the most important things that we would translate from the page onto the screen.
How did you come up with this visual style?
The style of the movie was really, really critical to whether or not the emotional resonance would really work. I started my animation career when every artist was holding either a pencil or a brush. These are all the things that inspired us to get into animation. And there's an analog warmth and a heart that comes from that there's really no replacement for. Can we actually make this look more like a painting than ever before? Yeah. We have brilliant, talented artists that are very good at that. Cool. I stay in my lane, which is story. When we're looking at animation or a layout, does it serve the story?
Does it serve the story?
Yeah.
That's the only secret for a good movie.
Yeah, and a story doesn't need to be complex. In fact, simplicity is strength. And I knew that we had accomplished it the day that I was sitting in a meeting called Color Dailies. I was completely fooled by it. And I thought, oh my gosh, we've actually done it.
Hello guys, welcome to the Animashow. Today I have the pleasure to discuss with Chris Sanders. Chris Sanders is the director of the last movie from Dreamworks, The Wild Robot. In this conversation, Chris shared with us how deep was the story for him and how he adapted this bestseller novel and transformed it into a spectacular movie. Nonetheless, the imagery is fantastic, but you see that the story also is super moving with this hero who is a robot but who has a lot of humanity and can talk with animals and wildness. This is a fabulous conversation, so please, if you like it, subscribe to our channel, push the likes button and activate the bell. Thank you very much. I wish you a good listening. Chris, welcome to the Animashow.
Oh, thank you so much. Good to be here.
During this Anasee festival, you're presenting a new movie. You're known for Dragons, for Lilo and Stitch, and today is The Wild Robot.
The Wild Robot, yeah.
What is this story about?
You know, it's a story written by Peter Brown. He's a writer and illustrator that made this amazing book that we thought would be a great movie, and it's about a piece of high technology, a robot, Rosm 7134, or Roz for short, who wakes up on the shore of an uninhabited island. She doesn't know she's lost, so she just wakes up and starts doing what she's programmed to do, which is to find her operator and get a job.
Yeah, because she needs to be like supervised by humans, but there is no human on the island.
Not one human in sight, and the only thing that she can find instead of people are animals. And she just assumes that these are the things that she's supposed to interact with. She finds that she can't communicate with them at first, but a Rosm robot being what they are, supercomputing machines, she actually sits and studies the animal's language, and she eventually breaks that language barrier and is able to communicate with them.
And then talk with and communicate with the animals and become friends. The robot also became a parent. Like we are talking about parenthood in this movie because she are raising this little Gosling.
Yes, quite accidentally. So rather than being friends, actually, when she finally cracks the language, she realizes that they don't like her, they're afraid of her, and they would prefer for her not to be there. And while she's being chased by one of them, a giant grizzly bear, she actually, and quite accidentally, runs across a goose's nest, destroying it. And the only thing left intact is one single egg. And she decides on her own that this is going to be her first job, to raise the gosling inside that egg to adulthood.
And you have a terrific voice casting. You work with Lupita and Nyong'o, also Pedro Pascal, Mark Hill. It's crazy. How did you find those actors and actresses for those characters?
You know, our wonderful casting director, Christy Soper, got us in touch with the right actors. And of course, we had to pitch the idea to them and see if they were willing to do it. And they were. And I think of all the voices, the one that took the most amount of just experimenting and I think work to find would have easily been Roz's voice by Lupita, because just the journey that character goes on is a very subtle one. It's grand and emotional, but it's also very subtle. And Roz changes from the beginning till the end, which you would expect. You know, she arrives on the island with a bunch of programming, but she has no programming for how to survive on an island and raise a gosling. Because again, this is not where she was supposed to be.
Yeah, it's kind of a coming of age story. Like,
Yeah.
You see this character like growing and knowing more about what she is or it is itself. And it's also a way for us human to take time to have a conversation with the nature. Is it something that really struck you when you were reading this novel? Was it the reason for you decided to adapt this book into an animated movie?
I think it's the reason we all fell in love with the book and we thought that it could make it a really amazing movie, because the journey that Roz goes on is unpredictable. Yeah. And it's something that I never feel like a story or a movie has to be relatable. Certainly, I love a lot of movies that I can't directly relate to. Yeah. A movie has to be compelling. And that's what this story is. It is incredibly compelling, but it just does happen to be very relatable, because Roz doesn't have the programming she needs to survive and accomplish this mission. And that is something that we can all relate to, absolutely. And particularly a robot that finds herself accidentally raising a child.
Exactly. And it's also a unique visual style that you came up with. Sometimes you look at the screen and you see like some Monet paintings, but also Miyazaki movie references. How did you come up with this special visual style?
The style of the movie was really, really critical to whether or not the emotional resonance would really work. Because, again, a piece of high technology lost in a wilderness, if we had made this even like 5 years ago, it wouldn't have worked, I don't think, as well, because we need this robot to believably be in a wilderness. I started my animation career when every artist was holding either a pencil or a brush.
Correct.
And the paintings of Tyrus Wong in Bambi or Miyazaki's backgrounds from My Neighbor Totoro, these are all the things that inspired us to get into animation. And there's an analog warmth and a heart that comes from that there's really no replacement for. So we've gone on this journey through CG, and we've been trying to wrap geometry with ever more sophisticated surfaces to make things look as though they were painted like they used to be. We were at the perfect moment at Dreamworks' I think artistic growth, because we had just made Bad Guys and Puss in Boots: Last Wish, and they were getting an illustrated style on screen. And I asked the artists and Ramon Zibach, the production designer, how much further can we go beyond that? Can we actually make this look more like a painting than ever before? Yeah. Again, in service to the story.
Hey, just a little brag to talk about our sponsor, 22D Music Group, the independent company specialized in the music rights management for series and movies. And Toon Boom, the company that offers award-winning 2D animation softwares as well as storyboard and production management softwares. A big thank you as well for our partner, the Anasee Festival. And we say hello to our friends from Écrans Total, the magazines where you find everything you need to know about the film and TV production business. Back to the conversation.
And what they created was nothing more than phenomenal, nothing short of phenomenal. And the way I could really illustrate that is that at the very beginning of the process, we begin our exploration into the film by making these very, very quick and loose little paintings, artistic studies, just to get a view of what the film
like
might look
like. Kind of.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And I asked,
and you were discussing about the style altogether and try to fix like a target, a vision on the style?
Yeah, we're looking for the mood, we're also just creating the different sets and things. And I knew that we had accomplished it the day that I was sitting in a meeting called Color Dailies, and we look at all sorts of things. We look at character designs, and I was looking at what I thought was another one of those color studies, and someone pushed a button and it began to move. And I was, as the director, and I had been there every day, every step of the way, I was completely fooled by it. And I thought, oh my gosh, we've actually done it. And at that moment, I thought, this journey that we began when we started, when we were painting and we went all the way into CG, I felt like, we've really come full circle. I think we've come back to where we originated. And this film absolutely looks like nothing I have ever seen before. And again, in service to what I think is an incredible story.
What is the message that you want the audience get from this movie? Is it like kindness is the way to survive in the world?
Wow, how did you know? Okay, so one of the very first things we did when we began the movie was we talked to Peter Brown, the guy who wrote and illustrated the book. And he told us the most important thing of all, that when he was writing the story, and he never put it in the book, he said his guiding principle was kindness can be a survival strategy. And as a screenwriter, I thought, that's brilliant. And so I was able to memorialize that within the movie. And certainly that is what guides Roz. And as Roz spends more time on this island, because she has her programming, but the animals on the island have theirs. And they are programmed to survive. If you don't win, you don't see the next day.
It's kind of like an internal code, like computing. They have to survive in the nature. So it's really, there is a similarity between the robots and the animals in this point.
And that's exactly the way Roz sees it. She says when Fink the fox, voiced by Pedro Pascal, actually says that to her, he says, look, you got to learn how things work on this island. And he explains it to her. And she says, you are programming. So she's looking at this thing that the animals do as their programming. Well, the more time she spends on the island, the greater the effect is that she has on everyone. And the culture of the island begins to shift because of this just unrelenting kindness and goodness that she just always exudes. And it's one of my favorite things about the story. It was in the book, and that was one of the most important things that we would translate from the page onto the screen.
One of the questions I have is, how do you proceed? What is your methodology to adapt a bestseller novel into a movie? Do you work closely with the author, or do you really go through the reading with all the crew and decide later on how to adapt it? How do you proceed?
We definitely talked to Peter Brown just to hear from his point of view what was the most important things in the book. And there are definitely things that you need to prune back. There's a lot of characters in the book. And I think sometimes people don't realize that making a movie is a very disciplined thing.
Of course.
You only have so much time, and an audience only has so much attention to spend. So you've got to be really choosy about what you elaborate on and what you really delve into. And there were so many big, beautiful, emotional moments that I didn't want them to feel rushed. And that's really where we start. We start by identifying our turning points, I would say, where the story goes and turns. So you find all those turning points, and we storyboard the whole thing ahead of time.
Okay.
So I worked with my head of story, Heidi Gilbert, and my editor, Mary Blee, and we have a whole storyboarding team. In a sense, make the film, I would say, we make the film 20 or 30 times on storyboards, and we try things, and we...
And you voiced over?
Yeah, we get rid of things. We do a lot before we even go to the actors to record.
Okay.
And it's always a journey of discovery and changing. You know, I would really liken it more than anything else to sculpture. It's like a dimensional sculpture, and you sculpt something, you take a look at it, you turn it, you go away, you look at it the next day, and then you make changes. And we certainly screen the film for ourselves in storyboard form many, many times. And again, we'll trim things out, put new things in. One of the biggest challenges actually was there's a moment in the book, which is very important, where Roz bridges the communication gap, and she unlocks the animal's language. And we tried that several different ways because it's such an important part of the story. One time we had it stretch over maybe 3 or 4 sequences.
Oh my
and
God.
over time she would unlock pieces of the language. And it just didn't work because, oddly enough, the more of it we put in the film, the less noticeable it was. So eventually we realized that we had to compact that moment into a very, very singular moment so that the audience really understood that she unlocked the language. So then the challenge was, if it's a shorter piece of film, it needs to be, I think, more noticeable and more, I'd say, consequential. So at that moment, we did something I'd never done in an animated film, which is we do a time lapse.
Oh, wow.
And in the book, the Rosm robot Roz disguises herself. She covers herself with leaves so the animals can't notice her, and she sits in hiding and watches them and learns and learns. And we did something kind of similar to that in our own way. And I have to say, it's, I think, one of the more exciting visual moments of the film. I just tell you this one because it's just an example of the kind of stuff that we have to do.
Yeah, and this is one of the pieces you are the most proud of.
Yeah, lots of trial and error. We discard, for everything you see on screen, there's probably 2, 3, or more times that we tried it that you don't see.
And that's the artwork. Like, you have to go and refine and do it again and do it again until you get what you expect from your vision.
Yes, as a story artist, and that's where I began, and I still do it. I storyboarded several sequences in the film. You just, having your work thrown out is just part of the job.
Yeah, you have to go.
You can't take it personally.
Do you have any suggestions for young directors or animators that would like to have their own film at the Anasee Festival in the future?
Yeah, it's all about story. I began my career as a story artist, and I learned on Beauty and the Beast and Mulan, and I learned from some of the best story artists in the business, Joe Ranft, Ed Gombert, Brenda Chapman, and I learned that craft. And eventually, when I began directing, I felt, oh no, I don't know how to do these things. I don't know how to animate, and I don't know how to draw a layout. And then it came to me that I don't need to do those things. We have brilliant, talented artists that are very good at that. Cool. I stay in my lane, which is story. And so I come at everything from a story standpoint. So when we're looking at animation or a layout, does it serve the story?
Does it serve the story? Yeah. That's the only secret for a good movie.
Yeah, and a story doesn't need to be complex. In fact, simplicity is strength. So if you want to do an animated anything, maybe start by writing it, or if you're animating, make sure that what you animate has a story within it. And even a single drawing can have story. Instead of just drawing a character standing there, draw a character walking into the wind, holding like their groceries, and the groceries are flying out of the bag. You can get story in a single drawing, and it always makes the drawing or whatever you're doing better because people become involved in it.
Thank you very much for this lesson. It's a great inspiration. Thank you very much for accepting my invitation on the podcast. And I wish you the best with this movie.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris.